I can tell you that this deal wouldn't be done without proper safeguards for U.S. national security and the interest of all our citizens, especially our children.
That was Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, who joined us earlier in the program to talk about the news of a framework deal on TikTok. Joining us right now is Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. He is the lead Democrat on the China Select Committee. And Congressman, thank you for being with us this morning. We didn't get all of the details on how this is going to work. I think a lot of it still depends on a conversation that's anticipated between President Xi and President Trump on Friday. But what is your take on where we stand with TikTok right now and what a potential framework might look like?
Look, we're still waiting on the details, and we need a deal ASAP. As long as ByteDance's ownership of TikTok is less than 20%, and there's not operational control or operational relationship between TikTok USA and ByteDance, let's go forward with the deal. We welcome it, and obviously that was because of the law that overwhelmingly passed in Congress on a bipartisan basis, and that got upheld unanimously by the Supreme Court.
So the concerns that you've had from a security perspective, the Treasury Secretary said that they weren't able to really cut down on the details of this until they got a phone call from Jameson. He and Jameson Greer got a phone call from President Trump saying that we would not negotiate on national security. And perhaps that push is what was needed. I assume that's what you wanted to hear as well?
Yes, we don't want to see any kind of national security issues being compromised. I'm concerned, however, that President Trump, in his rush for any kind of deal, any kind of meeting with Xi Jinping, is giving the CCP leverage, is giving Xi Jinping leverage with regard to TikTok. That's why I'm awaiting the details. I want to know exactly what's in that framework agreement and making sure that our national security is protected. We can't compromise on our national security.
What are you concerned is happening? That means control of the algorithm, knowing how the app decides to spin new content to users?
Yes, and access to data. Remember, underlying this particular law was basically the concern about the CCP's access to the data of 170 million Americans, and the fact that despite their repeated statements to the contrary, they were actually accessing the data in China. The data was actually stored in China, large portions of it, and it was being weaponized against Americans. The best example of it was when journalists who were actually reporting on TikTok were actually surveilled using their own data on TikTok. And so I think that this is a very serious issue, but we want TikTok to survive. We just don't want it to be under the control of the CCP.
So the reports that have been out there have suggested that Oracle would play a role with this. If Oracle was hosting the data here in the United States, would that be satisfactory to you?
Possibly. At the end of the day, I'm agnostic largely on what the ownership structure is, who is operating it, as long as it complies with the law. There are various investor groups who lined up to purchase TikTok USA. And, at the end of the day, I think we just want to make sure that our national security is protected.
Are you worried about issues beyond TikTok? You said that you were worried that in the rush to complete a deal with Beijing, that President Trump would, allow TikTok to be used for leverage. Do you think it extends beyond that? There was talk yesterday about NVIDIA and other arenas.
Definitely. I think that export controls is something that the CCP wants to relax. They want access to our highest end semiconductor chips. Again, that's a national security issue, Becky. The reason for our export controls is to prevent CCP-controlled entities from using our highest end semiconductor chips in their military modernization and in the persecution of Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and so forth, basically in ways against our values. And so I think that this is one of those areas where I believe, again, the CCP is going to exert its leverage to relax those export controls and also to gain advantage with regard to the TikTok deal.
What about American companies that get caught up in the midst of that? How do you feel about them? How should they be handled?
I think American companies, absolutely, we want them to continue to flourish, and they have, even as these export controls were implemented by both the first Trump administration, then the Biden administration, and this one. You can just see that in their stock prices, as you guys have illustrated repeatedly. And then secondly, we want to make sure that at the end of the day, we work with our friends, partners, and allies to create a robust trading market with regard to these particular products and an innovation market. But the CCP cannot be trusted on this particular issue.